All right, let's start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Ba'Hashem Yahushai, Ba'Hashem Racha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is The Epistles of Peter were addressed to the scattered Israelites. And pretty much that's exactly, what is stated in that chapter. And it's important to understand that, because when you understand that the Epistle of Peter was addressed to the Israelite foreigners, you can also see from that point that the letters or epistles that the Apostle Paul wrote were also addressed to Israelite foreigners. This is a big mystery surrounding who these Gentiles are. And in the world Christian view, they're saying that applies to all nations. Just the Gentiles now have an opportunity to get in to the covenants of Israel. When you go back and you research the covenants, you're not going to find any mention of the nations in there. This is just something that they did or pushed in there, during the time of the Renaissance. Because all nations never had a part in this. The only part that the nations have in this whole scheme of things, so to speak, is that they will be slaves in the kingdom of heaven. All right. So, I typed in here in the chat GPT, right? Just because this thought that came into my mind last night before I went to bed. So I said, let me just mess around with this, see what it says. So I asked, are the strangers in 1 Peter 1:1 scattered Israelites, right? Yes, the strangers, Greek parapidemos, moi, mentioned in 1 Peter 1:1 are most likely scattered Israelites. No, they either are or not. But you see how they try to use like ambiguous language. See, everything that Esau does in law or whatever the case may be, they always leave everything open-ended. Always leave it open for interpretation. They never give you something direct. Esau is not direct. Esau is very, slick, more subtle than any beast of the field. No, this I just asked if these strangers were Israelites, scattered Israelites. It said yes. Then it comes over here and saying are most likely scattered. No, they are Israelites, scattered Israelites, specifically Israelite Christians, Jews who believed in Yahushua as the Messiah. Though the interpretation can vary depending on theological and scholarly perspective. Yeah, but we're not concerned with the theological or scholarly perspectives, because those theological and scholarly perspectives are off. All right, because you have to understand it's coming from their viewpoint. So in their viewpoint, they're not the Israelites. So they're looking for a way in. Just like when you go back during the time of the building of the temple. And every time we built the temple, right, our forefathers rebuilt the temple, rebuilt the temple, you always had friction. You always had the nations coming against us. It's no different today. When you go back, there was no connection between the Israelites and the other nations outside of the other nations being servants to us. That's it. There was no spiritual connection. We weren't trying to teach them the law, statutes, and commandments and all of that. No. You had certain ones of them that did us favorably, and they received favor by being amongst, Israel, but they were never a part of those covenants. This is what these people don't get, because what role did they play? They played servants. They didn't play, okay, well, this servant here has been so good from another nation that, in a couple of years, if he keeps up the good work, we're going to make him a prince or a king over other Israel. No, it don't work like that. They were created to be where they're supposed to be. So pretty much we're getting, and even Calvin, who started Calvinism, even he agreed that the book of 1 Peter, 2 Peter was dealing with the Israelites that were scattered. Okay, here's the verse, 1 Peter 1:1, KJV. Peter, an apostle of Yahushua, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. And these were some of the major ports where you had a whole hub of Israelites all throughout that so-called Mediterranean region. Up in what they call Asia Minor, what the scriptures call Asia Minor. Today they call it Europe. The elder Makama goes into that all the time. So you had that when you look at a world map and you look at that region, all of that region there surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, you had Israelites scattered throughout all of that. And even among those islands, Cyprus and, the different islands in the Mediterranean Sea, you had Israelites all over the place. All right. And this was the mission. When Yahushua came on the scene, he came back to do what? To gather the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that's why once he finished his mission in Jerusalem, in that region, that part of the world, he came over to this side of the world and spoke to the Israelites that were here in the so-called Americas, before they were called Americas, and told them that he was going to return one day. And when he came in a chariot, and it was shiny. That's why when the natives, which are Northern Kingdom, saw those Spaniards with with the breastplates and all that, and they shining, they thought first that was the Lord, because they saw the and it reminded them of the feathered serpent, or the Kulkulkan, or the Quetzalcoatl, and they thought it was them, but it wasn't. All right. So Yahushua came over here, talked to them, and let them know that he was going to redeem them one day, come back and gather them back up. All right. So these are Israelite foreigners, and all throughout that region, these are, when you go here and you look at the different regions, the Apostle Paul is writing letters to these different areas. And like if you would write a letter to Ephesus or the Thessalonians, he will say, make sure that you share these letters with other, with some of the other churches. All right. So it says breakdown, strangers, parapidemoi. This Greek term often means sojourners, right? And in the Old Testament, right, the word for sojourners would be gar. Okay, that's the word for sojourner. All right, gar. This would be an Israelite foreigner, Israelite that had pretty much had limited rights, even though he was an Israelite. But when it came to if he came from a foreign land, he only had but so much, pull in the land of Israel, even though he was an Israelite. You see? And this is why when the widows of the Grecians, which were Israelites, and the Hebrews, was being meted, given out, the Grecians or the Hellenized Jews, they were not receiving, their just due, so to speak, because there was like a disdain going on for those other Israelites. It says exiles or foreign residents, right? Because they were born, let's say, in Pontus, or let's say they were born in Rome, or let's say they were born in Greece, right? In whatever region, outside of the land of Israel. You come into the land of Israel to keep let's say the high holy days, you're considered a foreigner, a foreign resident, a sojourner. Can have both literal and spiritual connotations, whatever that means. Example given: spiritual pilgrims on earth, scattered. The Greek term diasporas or diaspora is used, which is the same term used for the Jewish or the Israelite dispersion outside of the land of Israel. See, it says this strongly points to the ethnic Jews living in foreign lands. So this is, this is why we tell you have to understand the history to understand the mystery. And this is why we stress so much on the Apocrypha, and we stress so much on the Hellenization of the Israelites and that whole history of how the Greeks came, into Jerusalem and conquered it and forced their ways upon Jake. Some did it voluntarily, some under constraint. But nevertheless, that spirit passed on into that. And when we read in the book of Peter, which you're going to read, there's one particular verse further down where it's going to say that, dealing with the which we've been speaking about this on the regular, how these Israelites, by the time of Yahushua, that were speaking Greek, that were living in these Greek areas, that identified as Greek, this was generation after generation after generation of indoctrination. And that indoctrination caused them to forget about their roots. And we did a lesson yesterday based off of that. How that, I asked the Chat GPT if after a while these Israelites that were being taught Greeks, they forget that they Israelite roots or something along those lines. And they say yes. It says this strongly points to the ethnic Jews living in foreign lands. The regions listed, Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, were Roman provinces in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, where many Jews had settled. And this is why you had the Apostle Paul all throughout there. The Apostle Paul wasn't going to teach other nations. And I forget who it was. I think it was these Edomite-looking dudes. I believe it was them. Yeah, it was these Edomite-looking dudes that teach the same thing that we teach, but they teach that Esau are the Israelites. They teach the same exact doctrine we teach, but they teach the opposite. They teach that the Edomites are the Israelites. And even he said in one of his, one of the discussions they were having on these letters on the Gentile issue was you don't see the letter to the Ethiopians or the letter to this, because they were making a point that these people that were being, singled out were a particular nation, not the nations. Right. That's why, you don't have the letter to the Persians. The Apostle Paul's letter to the Persians. The Apostle Peter addresses, the Medes. You ain't gonna find that, because that's not who this truth is for. That's not who this gospel is for. It says key interpretive views. Ethnic Israelite Christians view traditional. Many early interpreters and some modern scholars believe Peter was writing primarily to Israelite believers in Yahushua, and that's exactly who he's writing to, Messianic Jews who were living in the diaspora, right? And that's what the word diaspora goes back to, scattering of the children of Israel. The use of terms like elect, scattered, and references to Old Testament concepts support this. That's right, because that was my next follow-up question. After this, I had a follow-up question on it. It says mixed audience views, more common today. See, this is a mixed audience view, which is common today. Just because something is common doesn't always make it right. Other scholars argue Peter wrote to both Jewish and Gentile Christians. No, it's specific. It's specific. And the Apostle Peter was specifically telling them how they became ignorant through the traditions that were passed down by your fathers, by your ancestors, which we're going to get that. Using Old Testament language to apply Israel's identity to the church. No, see, this is where you got that, replacement theology, supersessionism, right? It says, other scholars argue Peter wrote to both Israelite and Gentile Christians, using Old Testament language to apply Israel's identity to the church. Bullshit. Because Israel's identity applies just to Israel. For instance, in 1 Peter 2:9, he calls his readers a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Terms originally applied to Israel and that's all it applies to. And that was the main point. And this is the follow-up question that I had. Spiritualized identity view. Some see the scattered strangers as symbolic of all Christians. Here we go. See, this is bullshit. This is the erring part. Living as spiritual exiles in a hostile world, no. Waiting their true home in heaven, no. Conclusion. Where there's debate, there is strong evidence that Peter's audience included and possibly primarily consisted of Israelite Christians. No, that's all it consisted of. An example, Israelites living in dispersion. That's exactly what we're talking about. The language used is consistent with the Israelite diaspora. And Peter, being the apostle to the circumcision, Galatians 2:8, would naturally address such a group. However, the broader spiritual application suggests Gentile Christians may have been included as well, but that's not in there. You ain't gonna find that. All right. Now, I didn't, I just jumped and I said, those strangers are scattered Israelites indeed. More proof is in 1 Peter 2:9-10, right? Yes, absolutely right. 1 Peter 2:9-10 provides very strong support for the idea that Peter is writing to scattered Israelites because he directly applies Old Testament language that was originally spoken to Israel. And you cannot apply this to anybody else if it was addressed to a particular people. This is why I always speak about the contract. These devils don't want to abide by the contract. They try to apply the covenants of Israel to the other nations. And then nowhere in there is it saying that the other nations had a part in that. Where they err at is because when you read the New Testament and you read about the salvation of the Gentiles, automatically you have in your mind the other nations. But the word Gentile just simply means nations. And the Gentiles could either apply to the actual nations or it could apply to the Israelites. So 1 Peter 2:9-10, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people. This is all language that was written to Israel, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in time past were not a people, more language of Israel, but are now the people of the Most High, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. And this is why you have to go back to the Old Testament to find out where these passages are in the Old Testament, right? That said that used this language and who it was addressed to. Because if you went to a court of law and you try to bring that argument in a court of law, and if the court of law was just, and they'll go back to the contract, which is the Old Testament, you're not going to find any clauses in there that include the heathen nations into the covenants of Israel. You're not going to find that because it doesn't exist. It says breakdown in connection to the Old Testament. Verse 9 direct quotes from the Torah. Peter is quoting Exodus 19:5-6 and Deuteronomy 7:6, where the Most High speaks specifically to the children of Israel. Exodus 19, and then Ephesus, right, is in the region of Turkey, in the same region that the Apostle Peter is addressing. So when you go back, right, to that, it goes back into the Apostle Paul speaking to these Israelite foreigners that are called Ephesians, that are saints, that are Israelites, but that lost their way. They were strangers to the covenant at one time. Why? Because of the ignorance that was in them, because of the conversation they received from their ancestors. Going back to the Hellenization period of the Israelites. It says, you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, and you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. Who was that said to? Israelites. Deuteronomy 7:6. For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy power. The Lord thy power hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself. And it says, above all people that are upon the face of the earth. This language was never spoken to Gentile nations, but to Israelites. Thank you. Verse 10 reference to Hosea. Peter also alludes to Hosea 1:9-10 and Hosea 2:23, where the Most High speaks about the northern kingdom of Israel, often called Ephraim or the house of Israel, which is really the whole nation, which was cast off, not my people, but would one day be restored, right? Because at one point the whole nation got cast out. So Hosea 1:9-10, for you are not my people, and I will be your power. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, and it shall be said unto them, you are not the sons of the living power. This is like jumbled up. And I will say to them, which were not my people, thou art my people, and they shall say, thou art my power. Right? So let's read this correctly. Let's read this correctly. I don't want to leave this one. I'll come back. I'll come back here. Let's go to Hosea. We'll come back to this one. Hosea chapter 1 and verse 9. This was the Lord telling Hosea that, look, I'm about to cut these people off. Hosea 1 and 10, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. Right, but there's only going to be an elect that's going to be delivered from among them, a remnant. And it shall come to pass that in the place, which was here in America, where it was said unto them, you are not my people, and you still hear it to this day. We come up and tell them we're the Israelite. No, the God and Jesus, they don't got no color. They wasn't, they're not black, whatever. Right? You are not my people. There shall be said unto them, you are the sons of the living power. And that's what we're, this is where we're at today. And the proof is talking about the whole nation. It says, then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel, when this happens, be gathered together. And we see that happening right now. So it's talking about the whole nation, not just the northern kingdom. And appoint themselves one head, which is King David. And then you have Yahushua, which is the head. And then you have the Most High on top of that. It says, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Jezreel goes back to the Hebrew word Yazrai Allah, which means he, seed, power. He, seed of God. Yazrai Allah. Okay, so let me bring this back because I wanted to keep this going. All right, so it says this prophecy is clearly about Israelites who were exiled, disowned, and later regathered and reconciled to the Most High. A direct match to the idea of strangers scattered in 1 Peter 1 and 1. And when I asked ChatGPT before about the reconciling, because they try to say that the nations were reconciled, I said, how can you be reconciled and, and they were never a part of this? You're correct, but, when you do, and then they were added and this, come on, man, full of shit. Conclusion, yes, 1 Peter 2, but let's watch the spin. Yes, 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10 strongly supports the idea. See, now it went from yes to, possibly to strongly supports the idea that Peter is addressing scattered Israelites. He uses exclusive conventional language originally spoken to Israel at Sinai. So how can you take that and apply it to anybody else? He references Hosea's prophecy about the lost tribes of Israel. So how can you apply the other nations to that? Being brought back into covenant. This aligns with the opening verse of the epistle, 1 Peter 1 and 1, where Peter greets the strangers scattered as clear reference to the diaspora of Israel. So your insight is well-founded and backed directly by Scripture. If you'd like, we can explore how this ties in with New Testament themes of the two houses of Israel, the grafting in of the Jesse. So you see the spin or Peter's role as an apostle to this circumcision. This is talking about all Israelites. Now let's go to Peter. Right, 1 Peter 1 and 1. Peter, an apostle of Yahushua, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. So these are scattered throughout that whole region. If you look at a map, you'll be able to find these. If you click here and look at each one of these places, it'll tell you where they're located at. And the majority of them are, I believe, if not all of them, are located right in what they call today Turkey or Turkiya. You got to get it right, true. Okay, elect. See. According to the foreknowledge of the Most High, the Father, through sanctification of the Spirit unto obedience and sprinkling of the blood of Yahushua, grace unto you and peace be multiplied. Right, because you lost your way, but now through the blood of Yahushua, you have a way back. So now let's jump down. You can read the whole thing. We're just going to jump down to the... I'll just go to 13. Wherefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is to be brought unto you at the revelation of Yahushua. As obedient children, listen good, not fashioning yourselves according to the former lusts in your what? Ignorance. When you lost your way, you were ignorant to this truth. You were ignorant to the covenants of Israel. You were ignorant And there was reason why you became ignorant. But as he which hath called you is holy, so be ye holy in all manner of conversation. Going back again to what? To Israel. Because it is written, be ye holy, for I am holy. So who was this written to? This was written to the Israelites. And even when you go back and you research where some of these are written at, it tells you that this is addressed to the Israelites. So this is on all levels. The evidence is overwhelming, but yet these devils are still going to try to throw in the heathen in there. And if you call on the Father who without respect the persons judgeth according to every man's work, pass the time of your sojourning here in fear. Now this is the point. For as much as you know that you were not redeemed with corruptible things, as silver and gold, from your vain conversation received by tradition from your fathers. This is what caused you to go off. When we go to the NLT, I love the way this is written here. It says, for you know that the Most High paid a ransom to save you from the empty life you inherited from your ancestors. Going back to what? To the Greek Empire, the Hellenization of Israel. And the ransom he paid was not mere gold or silver. NIV is pretty good too. For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors. And this is what we've been saying, that over time the Israelites lost their way. They no matter what they did, they lost their way. Certain ones of them. And what it was a like today, Jake don't know that they're Israelites. It's something that's been passed from generation to generation to generation. They call themselves Black, Puerto Rican, Dominican, whatever. Why? Because that was something that was ingrained in them, going all the way back. But prior to that, they weren't calling themselves these names. So through generation after generation after generation, of course, you're going to be ignorant to who you are. And that's what this is about. And it happened through the vain conversations that were handed down by your ancestors. And how many times we've been saying that? Many times. You know, how those Israelites, by the time of Yahushua, had been so ingrained in the Greek life, Greek cultures and religion, that they forgot who they were. They were detached. And that's why when you go back to the book of Hebrews, they were detached. There was another point that came to mind, but it kind of escaped me. So Lord's will, if it comes back, I'll bring it out. If not, you get the idea. All right. All right. So now let's go to the second chapter real quick. 1 Peter 2 and 1. Wherefore, laying aside all malice and all guile and hypocrisies and envies and all evil speakings, as newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the word, that you may grow thereby. Why? Because since you forgot, now we got to go back and we got to, teach you all over again. Let's go real quick to Hebrews 5, and then we'll come right back. Hebrews 5 and 12. It says, for the time you ought to be teachers, you have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of the Most High, and have become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat. For everyone that uses milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. And that's why the Apostle Peter told him, now you got to start all over again. You got to go back to, you got to throw all that stuff out. The Apostle Paul said it too. You got to put off that old man, those vain conversations that you had, the ignorance that was in you, all of that. You got to push that away. You got to start all over again. If so be you have tasted that the Lord is gracious, to whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of the Most High and precious. Ye also as lively stones are built up a spiritual house and holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to the Most High by Yahushua. Once again, language that's used for the Israelites. Now you're being brought back. Wherefore also it is contained in the scripture, behold, I lay in Zion the chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he that believeth on him shall not be confounded. Unto you therefore which believe, he is precious. But unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner. Right. Because you had those that rejected Yahushai, and then you had those from among the Israelite foreigners that accepted him. And a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, even to them which stumble at the word, being disobedient, whereunto also they were appointed. Going back to Romans, the 11th chapter. Because the ones that rejected him, they were cut off. And that opening gave an opening to the Israelite foreigners that were caught up into the Greek ways or the Roman ways to be brought back into the fold. And this is what then he continues on to tell them, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, all language of that used to describe or speak to the Israelites, not the other nations. So you can't go and add to a contract when the contract was already been written out and signed. And that's what you devils are trying to do. You're trying to reverse, or you're trying to remove, all of the language in the scriptures that clearly speaks about the Israelites, and you're trying to add everybody in there because you're trying to add yourself in there. It says that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Yeah, because you were darkened in your mind from the ignorance that was in you, that you received from the vain conversations from your ancestors, which in time past were not a people. See, Israel again, more language dealing with Israel, but are now the people of the Most High, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. Language spoken to the Israelites. So he's telling them, look, you have to, change, because you're still going to live around these other Israelites that have that mindset of the Gentiles. But you have to change. You can't go backwards. You can't go back into that. That's what the Apostle Peter was telling them. That's what the Apostle Paul was telling them. Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. Because that's why you were in the condition you were in before. Because you had no guidelines. You had no restrictions. Having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, meaning the other Israelite foreigners. Because they're going to look at you, when you read the 4th chapter, they said they're going to look at you like you're strange because you don't go back with them. And matter of fact, fuck it. Cannot. Let's go to it, and then we'll come back to this. 1 Peter chapter 4. And yeah, fuck it. Start at 1. 1 Peter 4:1. For as much then as Yahushua has suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves likewise with the same mind, for he that has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. No, it's, basically just say, fuck, I'll just read the whole thing. Not, you know what I mean. I don't mean it that way. That he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh to the lust of men, because that's what the Israelite foreigners were doing. But to the will of the Most High, right? Which the will of the Most High consists of restrictions. You have to refrain from a lot of things. For the time past of our life may suffice us to have wrought the will of the Gentiles, right? Because we were caught up into that life. That's what the Apostle Peter is explaining to these Israelite foreigners. When we walked in lasciviousness, lust, excess of wine, revelings, banquetings, and abominable idolatries, you know that you were Gentiles. I mean, it's all here. The language is all there. But the confusion comes from these wacky-tacky Christians that don't have a clue or understanding of what the scriptures are saying. Even the ones that go to college, even the ones that have doctorate degrees and are very well spoken and know all these different theological terminologies. Even they're lost. It says, wherein they think it strange that you run not with them, right? Your boys. You had boys that you was cool with, and you used to go out there partying with them and all that. And now they're looking at you like you're crazy. Well, that's what was going on back here with these Israelite foreigners that came to the Lord, accepted the Lord, wherein they think it's strange that you run not with them to the same excess of riot, right? Because you used to run with them, used to run with that crew, but now that the Lord tapped your spirit, you don't run with them no more. And they're looking at you like, yo, what's wrong with this dude? Would you too good to hang out with us? You know? So that was what was going on back then. It says, speaking evil of you, who shall give account to him that is ready to judge the quick and the dead. Yeah, they're speaking evil of you. They're mocking you, ridiculing you. This guy in the Bible now? What? For this cause was the gospel preached also to them that are dead, meaning the ones that were mentally, spiritually dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to the Most High in the spirit, right? Because you have those that are going to come to the Lord, that are going to be dead to this world, and then you have those that are in this world, that are part of this world, that are dead to the Lord. You know? And, you know, it goes on and on and on, you know? But this is the main point. Having your conversation honest. Actually, the point is that these are Israelite foreigners. But it says here, having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, meaning all the rest of those Israelite foreigners that you was hanging around. That whereas they speak against you as evildoers, right? Because wait a minute, man, you against Dionysus, man? You ain't riding for Bacchus no more? What? Say it ain't so, man. Yo, let's roll on this food, you know? Hey, fool. You know, you ain't gonna carry the ivy leaf no more? Oh man, come on, man. What? You ain't putting no more bunny eggs on the Diana anymore? Nah, man, I'm through with you. You see? That it says, they may by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify the Most High in the day of visitation. Like, damn, you know, I mean, they can't say nothing. They see you change your life, but they're ridiculing you, but they see that you change your life and you continue on that path. And when the destruction comes, they're gonna be like, man, you know, they ain't gonna be able to say nothing bad about you. All right, so that's pretty much the main point. So I just wanted to, you know, bring that out. And I was pleasantly surprised that they got it right, but they still try to sneak in, you know, a little bit of that, you know, Gentiles, you know, and that's not what it's talking about. It's talking about all Israel. Because when you look at the landmass that this is speaking of, you had a lot of Israelites scattered there in 1 Peter, the first chapter, in the first verse. You know, all of these regions here, the Apostle Paul went to them. He wrote letters to certain ones of these, you know, and this is who the apostles were addressing, these Israelite foreigners that had lost their way specifically during the Greek Empire. All right, so with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. Till next time I say, Shalom.